Labyrinth of the Wind. The whole day passed in a kind of distracted mood. I did everything on autopilot, made breakfast, answered emails, talked to people, but it was as if I wasn't really there myself. My thoughts kept drifting away, as if the wind was blowing them out of my head. In the evening, I stepped out onto the balcony. The sky was cloudlessly clear, but the gusty wind would not die down. It swirled dry leaves in the air, tugged at the edges of the curtains, whispered through the cracks in the windows. Suddenly, it seemed to me that there was some kind of structure in its gusts, as if it was repeating the same rhythm, like a fragment of a melody or a thought that couldn't be made out. When I went to bed, that rustling breath of the wind was still echoing in my head. It was also the first thing I heard in my dreams. I found myself on the top of a high cliff. Below, the sea was raging. Waves crashed against the rocks, but there was no sound of water, only that same howling, living wind. In front of me stretched a strange, translucent labyrinth. It hovered in the air, as if made of wind and light. Its walls shimmered, appearing and disappearing, like the wavering of hot air currents. I didn't know why I had to go in there, but I felt it was necessary. Every turn inside the labyrinth was unpredictable. Sometimes it led to a dead end, sometimes it looped back on itself, and sometimes the walls suddenly shifted, revealing entirely new paths. But most importantly, in each of these passages, I heard voices. Some sounded like echoes of my own thoughts, others like familiar phrases from long-forgotten people, and some whispered, as if from another time or life. At one of the intersections, I noticed a silhouette of a woman with long flowing hair. She wasn't walking, but seemed to glide through the walls of the labyrinth. When I approached, she turned around. I recognized her as the very same woman from the Glass City. But now her gaze was troubled. "You're here again," she said, "and the wind is calling you for a reason." I wanted to ask her so many questions, but she put a finger to her lips, signaling for silence. At that moment, the space began to tremble, and the walls of the labyrinth started to crumble, scattering in whirlwinds. "Run to the heart. Only at the very center will you learn why you have come," she whispered, and vanished into the vortex. I ran, feeling the wind pushing me forward. The labyrinth was collapsing behind me, but ahead, it seemed to open up, and then I found myself at the center, a circular platform, above which hovered a motionless, perfectly round eye made of cloud. Transparent and shimmering, it gazed at me. And suddenly I realized it was me, or more precisely, the one who is always observing, without fear, without judgment, without form, only pure awareness. I closed my eyes and stepped forward into the very eye of the wind. I woke up on an inhale, deep and full. The air in the room was fresh, the curtain was stirring. The wind was still there, and in its breath now there was no anxiety, only clarity. I lay there a little longer, staring at the ceiling, listening to the breathing of the room and the silence within myself. Then I got up, went to the kitchen, drank some water, and put the kettle on. While it was boiling, I wrote down this dream in my notebook. Right away, while the details were still vivid and hadn't scattered like clouds. Just to record it, to remember in case I forget. After my shower, I started making breakfast and noticed how everything in my head was falling into place. It was as if the dream swept all the unnecessary things to the roadside, leaving only what mattered. In the dream, I entered a labyrinth of wind and light, a structure made of movement, air, and voices, created not by an external will, but by the vibration of my own inner field. This labyrinth was the subtle body of my consciousness, fluid, shifting, breathing. Its walls were my beliefs, memories, impulses, forgotten phrases, the polyphony of everything I had ever heard and thought. And at the same time, it was something much greater. I was wandering not just through the structure of a dream, but moving through layers of memory, feelings, perceptions. And each room, each turn was not a map, but a moment of awareness. I heard the multitude of voices, and in that there was truth. There are many voices living in my head. My mind is not a monologue. It is a choral cathedral, and for the first time, I heard it not as noise, but as depth. When I met her, the very one who came from dreams, I realized she was not only the anima, but also a guide between worlds, between the personal and the transpersonal within me. Her gesture of silence is not a prohibition, but a reminder that the deepest knowledge comes not through questions, but through presence. She pointed to the goal run to the heart and disappeared because her work was done. From here, the path is mine. I reached the center of the labyrinth, which, as is now clear, is the center of my own consciousness. And at this center, there is not a symbol, not a god, not a being, but an eye pure, transparent, all-seeing. It looked at me, and I understood. I am that gaze. Not a body, not a form, not a story, but the very act of seeing, pure awareness itself. And in that moment, something important happened. I ceased to be the observed and became the observer. I stepped into that eye not as if into a portal, but as into my very self. Into the one who sees and never speaks, who does not judge, does not fear, does not demand, but simply is. And I woke up not in fear, not in anxiety, not with questions, but with a breath that was full, alive, and real. I understood. The wind is not anxiety, but breath. The labyrinth is not a trap, but the structure of my perception. The center is not a point, but the consciousness that I am. The labyrinth of wind and light is a symbol of my psychic structure fluid, impermanent, yet possessing rhythm. It is not confusion, but the dynamics of thought and perception. The voices within are layers of my inner world, memory, past influences, karmic or psychogenetic traces, and at the same time, the inner archive of my wholeness. The woman pointing to the center is the anima, serving as a guide into the space of the higher self. Her gesture of silence is a reminder that silence is the doorway to true knowledge. The destruction of the labyrinth is the falling away of the structure of the self, the departure of stories, the past, and tensions. The central eye is the archetype of the higher self, the observer, pure presence without form. In Buddhist, Taoist, Gnostic, and transpersonal psychology, this is a symbol of the enlightened center of the personality. Stepping into the eye means merging with the present moment, letting go of roles, reactions, and control. This dream is like a meditative insight expressed in symbols. It is not about working with pain, it is about working with perception. I entered my own consciousness as a space, listened to what lives within it, and came to the center, where there is no noise, only pure clarity. This is, without exaggeration, a dream of the level of awakening. Even if it is symbolic, it is not just beautiful, it is useful. It gives me a tool, a point of entry, an inner support, a way to recognize the essence amid the inner noise. Perhaps this is the very essence. Sometimes, in order to hear yourself, you need to let the wind carry away everything unnecessary. And then, what remains, that is you.